Hello, my name is Erin Weaver. I'm submitting this video to go over key concepts from my discussion on psychological constructs for a graduate class I'm currently in for quantitative methods in social science research. Just to introduce myself briefly, I am employed full-time, am a mom of 2 active kids, and pursuing my master's degree in psychology through American Public University, also known as American Military University. The basis of this video is to discuss key concepts of psychological constructs overall. So before I dive into my specific example, I want to briefly touch on what psychological constructs are. And in psychology, a construct is an abstract concept or idea that we know exists. Things like intelligence, motivation, or memory. The challenge for psychologists is that you can't physically see or hold these things. Because psychology is a science, researchers must figure out how to study these invisible concepts by indirect methods. And they do this through a process called operationalization. So this basically means taking an abstract idea, defining it by observable, measurable behaviors, and then researchers must translate the invisible mental concept into tangible data such as test scores, physical reactions, or surveys, so you can run statistical analysis and actually draw scientific conclusions. For my class discussion, the specific construct that I chose to focus on is working memory, which belongs to the cognitive system. Working memory is essentially the brain's mental workspace. It's our ability to temporarily hold on to information and then actively manipulate it while we are right in the middle of a task to aid in solving problems, making decisions, or following instructions. And as I mentioned in my original post, a great everyday example that most everyone knows is cooking. If I'm following a recipe, measuring out ingredients, and my kids suddenly interrupt me, I have to rely on my working memory to hold my place, remember what I had just added, and figure out what to do next. It has a very limited capacity, which is why distractions can make us lose our train of thought. How do researchers study this specific construct, you may ask? Well, as I initially stated, researchers can't directly see anyone's working memory, right? So they must operationalize it. They study this by designing experiments with specific cognitive tasks, and a common example is a digital span task, where a researcher will utilize a sequence of digits, either visually or auditorially, and then have the participant recall either forward span or in the reverse order. Researchers then measure the quantitative outcomes, things like accuracy. So how many times were remembered correctly, or like longest sequence, and they'll do it for both forward and reverse. Now this is where it gets really interesting and complex. As referenced within week 1 content, the article, A Consensus on the Brain Training Industry from the Scientific Community, discusses the way that we measure a construct that has huge real-world implications. Perfect example is the multi-billion-dollar brain training industry, which sells games that claim to improve cognitive abilities like working memory. However, a major consensus statement from the Stanford Center on Longevity and the Max Planck Institute points out a critical issue with this. The scientists argue that while people get better at the specific games they practice, there is very little compelling evidence that these skills transfer to broader, real-world cognitive improvements. In their words, exactly, claims promoting brain games are frequently exaggerated and at times misleading, which this is a key problem in psychological research. Just because you improve on one specific operationalized task, like, say, a single computer game, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have improved the entirety of the underlying construct of working memory. The article then goes on to emphasize that the notion that performance on a single task cannot stand in for an entire ability is a cornerstone of scientific psychology. This shows why it's so important for researchers to be rigorous and critical about their methods and the conclusions they draw. The impact of researching working memory, when done correctly, is incredibly broad. These impacts include teachers within classrooms, understanding cognitive load or overload, as well as in the clinical setting for assessing conditions like ADHD or traumatic brain injuries. I hope this explanation helps demonstrate my overall understanding of what psychological constructs are, how researchers operationalize them, to study them quantitatively, and using the brain training industry as an example, why being critical of research claims is so important. I look forward to continuing my educational growth in psychology as I learn more about quantitative methods and research, as I have already studied qualitative methods in research. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to next time. Have a great day.